The very first candy given to me by my grandfather. It was Werther's original, and I was 4. I had a little trouble opening that shiny golden wrapper, but then, well, I'll never forget that first taste. Sweet and creamy and just plain good. But there was something else, too. I remember feeling I must be somebody very special when my grandpa gave me his wonderful butter candy. So, now I'm the grandfather. And what else would I give my little grandson but my Werther's original? He's somebody special, too.
You know, Timmy, this reminds me of when I played with my dad. First, you get my trains rolling.
I got it.
Fisher-Price introduces the Magic Track train.
Then he'd show me how things worked.
Watch closely, Dad.
Boy, the fun we had together.
That's my job, Dad.
With Magic Track, just by turning a handle, kids can run a railroad all by themselves.
Boy, wasn't that great, Dad?
Yeah. Tomorrow I'll show you even more.
Thanks, Dad.
These are 2 identical slotted spoons and 2 very different spaghetti sauces, Prego and Ragu. When you see them side by side, the difference really comes through. Prego spaghetti sauce. Homemade taste. It's in there.
Shoot some slices, salad shooter. Shoot some shreds, salad shooter. Shoot some salad, shoot it fast, shoot it pretty, pretty salad shooter.
Presto Salad Shooter Slicer Shredder. Easier than a food processor. Just point.
Who was presently unrepresented, or indeed to both parties, can bring about what I like to call a planning system. Remember Hubert Humphrey used to talk about, he would say he did not believe in a planned society. You know, liberals are always attacked. They believe in planning, nuts and bolts. He said, no, I don't believe in this. He said, but I believe in a planning society, one that constantly plans ahead. And our government simply cannot plan ahead. It can plan for next year, maybe, or this year. But in terms of the problems that are arising in this country and around the world, we're going to continue just to be behind.
So a transformational leader not only deals with the immediate problem, but he changes the way we think about the problem?
Yes, that's even more fundamental. The way Roosevelt, who above all was a preaching president, who taught the need for government. He taught people you don't need to fear government, you must use government for your own purposes. So you have to change habits of thought about government, you have to change the system, and you have to change parties. A very good concrete example of a transforming leader would be some Democrat who could realign the party system the way Reagan realigned it on the right. Reagan created a conservative party out of the Republican Party by sloughing off the old Rockefeller wing. We will have a transforming leader on the left, on the liberal side, the day we get, probably has to be a president who will attract so many tens of millions of Americans into the Democratic Party that A, he wins elections, and B, he will have the support of a huge constituency to do what he wants to do.
Has any president ever done this?
Yes, Roosevelt again did a partial realignment of the party system. He made the Democratic Party into essentially a liberal party, although it always hung on to its Southern conservatives. But also he brought out liberalism in the South. But that was half a realignment. And we've kind of gone back to the old system of the Democrats being all things to all men and women.
If you could wave a wand and bring about some changes in this constitutional and political system, what would some of them be?
Change the two-thirds treaty requirement in the Senate so that it's easier to put through treaties.
Right now, 2/3 of the Senate must ratify a treaty the president has recommended.
Yes, but what's happened is that because presidents knew they could not get treaties through the Senate, they did things by fiat, through executive agreements. There are hundreds and thousands of executive agreements that the president individually signs with other nations. They are just as important as the treaties. They have the same standing in law. And here's a case of where we let the president become much too powerful because we won't bring in the collective government through making it easy to get a majority in the House and Senate.
Also, presidents trade away such tiny things. They have to play such a grubby game to get an important treaty passed. They give up a judgeship here, give up a contract there.
Yes.
Second change.
The second change would be a very simple one, and that is to give members of the House of Representatives 4-year terms, coterminous with a presidential term.
And what do you think this would change?
First of all, it would allow a congressman or woman to start being a good legislator without immediately having to raise money for the next election. The thing is just brutal, what it calls for in terms of money. Secondly, it gives them a chance to be a little bit more forward-looking and even visionary. That is, they can figure, I got 4 years, and maybe I'll have a tough year or so, but I can plan for the long run, sort of the marathon aspect. And it also does enable more teamwork in that, in every case, members of the House would be running on the same ticket as the president. So you get a little more teamwork between president and House of Representatives.
Another suggestion?
The other suggestion is my most basic one. It's a very old-fashioned suggestion, and that is to go back to the strong party system we had in the past. To try to do away with the mechanisms that have destroyed that system. For example, not to have so many party primaries, so-called party primaries. They're really king of the rock type primaries where people seize control of the party and don't necessarily represent the party. To repeal a lot of anti-party laws that we have on the books, but above all, to try to develop among the people a sense that the party has been historically in this country a great democratizing force and has been a great force for good government, in that when one party gets control of all branches of government, that party is responsible. That's the party you can happily kick out if they don't do the job, and put the other party in, and then kick them out if they don't do the job. But that's the best way to deal with politicians in office.
You ran unsuccessfully for the Congress in 1958?
Yes.
History would have lost a distinguished practitioner if you had won, but
Wish you'd been my campaign manager.
If you had won, what do you think, looking back, would have happened to you? Would you have had to play the game King of the Rock?
That's a very fundamental question I have wrestled with, and the answer is, I'm afraid I would have had to play the game. And let me give you a good example that goes back to much of this discussion. I had some wonderful textile worker unions in this district. Everything's gone now, but these were my troops. Wonderful union, Textile Workers Union of America. Marvelous people, Polish and Italian and French Canadian and Irish and WASPs and so on. They knocked themselves out for me. That union in Holyoke and Pittsfield and North Adams. The party did its best, but even then the party wasn't very strong, and I had been a party chairman, and I knew it wasn't very strong. Burns gets elected to Congress. A tariff bill comes up. And the party, being a low tariff party historically, would say to me, vote for a low tariff bill. And my textile people and the employers are saying, we're losing, we're going out in this district, you must help us. And when it came to the crunch, I would think of those workers out there on that wet election day working for me. And I would do exactly what I deplore in politicians generally. I would have, in the crunch, gone their way. I would have tried to work out ways of compromising and so on, naturally. But the reason for this would not only be my moral failure, it would be the system. I would say to myself, I can do so much good in this job that if I just make a compromise here, I can get reelected, particularly in these tough off-year elections. And that's the way the system works. So I, in the end, Bill, think much more in terms of the nature of our institutions, the nature of our thought, than I do about the politicians. I feel the politicians, more than any of us, are the victims of this system. And I would like a system that let the politicians rise to the greatness that I think is in them.
From Williamstown, Massachusetts, this has been a conversation with James McGregor Burns. I'm Bill Moyers. Calculations come from a man who is famous for thinking globally and rationally. Tonight he tells us why we all must follow suit if we want to survive, and why we can't wait for the year 2000 AD to start. Join me for a conversation with Isaac Asimov.
This program is made possible by a grant from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. A World of Ideas with Bill Moyers.
Isaac Asimov. Whatever you've probably read something of his. Science fiction, of course. His Foundation series is a classic. Science fact, chemistry, astronomy, physics, biology, children's books, history, math. One scientist calls him the greatest explainer of the age. The American Humanist Association has named Dr. Asimov the Humanist of the Year, and some religious folk have considered him the incarnation of the devil. In the Great Hall of Cooper Union in New York City, where Americans have been debating ideas since the days of Abraham Lincoln, I asked Dr. Asimov about his faith in the power of human reason.
Are you an enemy of religion?
No, I'm not. I feel that, as seems to me any civilized, humane person should feel, is that every person has a right to his own beliefs and his own securities and his own likings. What I'm against is attempting to place a person's belief system onto the nation or the world generally. You know, we object because we say constantly that the Soviet Union is trying to dominate the world, communize the world. Well, you know, the United States, I hope, is trying to democratize the world. But I certainly would be very much against trying to Christianize the world, or to Islamize it, or to Judaize it, or anything of the sort. And my objection to fundamentalism is not that they are fundamentalists, but that essentially they want me to be a fundamentalist too. Now, I can imagine they object. They say, I believe that evolution is true, and I want everyone to believe that evolution is true. But I don't want everyone to believe that evolution is true. I want them to study what we say about evolution and decide for themselves. Now, they say they want to teach creationism on an equal basis, but they can't. It's not a science. You can teach creationism in the churches, in the courses on religion. I mean, they would be horrified if I were to suggest that in the churches they teach secular humanism as an alternate way of looking at the universe, or they teach evolution as an alternate way of considering how life may have started. In the church, they teach only what they believe, and rightly so, I suppose. But on the other hand, in schools, in science courses, we've got to teach what scientists think is the way the universe works.
But of course, this is what frightens many believers. They see science as uncertain, always tentative, always subject to revisionism. They see science as a complex and chilling and enormous universe ruled by chance and impersonal laws. They see science as dangerous.
That is really the glory of science, that science is tentative, that it is not certain, that it is subject to change. What is really, in my way of thinking, disgraceful is to have a set of beliefs that you think is absolute and has been so from the start and can't change, where you simply won't listen to evidence. You say, if the evidence agrees with me, it's not necessary. If it doesn't agree with me, it's false. This is the legendary remark of Omar when they captured Alexandria and asked what to do with the library. He said, if the books agree with the Koran, they are not necessary and may be burned. If they disagree with the Koran, they are pernicious and must be burned. Well, there are still these Omar-like thinkers who think that all of knowledge will fit into one book called the Bible and refuse to allow that there is even the conceivability of an error there. That, to my way of thinking, is much more dangerous than a system of knowledge which is tentative and uncertain.
Do you see any room for reconciling the two world views, the religious view, the biblical view of the universe as God's drama, constantly interrupted and rewritten by divine intervention, and the view of the universe as scientists hold it, always having to be subjected to the test of observation and experimentation? Is there any room for reconciling?
Well, there is, if people are reasonable about this. There are many scientists who are honestly religious. You can rattle off the names of them. Millikan was a truly religious man. Morley of the Michelson-Morley experiment was truly religious. There were hundreds of others who did great scientific work, good scientific work, and at the same time were religious. But they did not mix their religion and science. In other words, they did not presume that if something they didn't understand took place in science, they could dismiss it by saying, well, that's what God wants. Or, at this point, a miracle took place. No, no. They know that science is strictly a construct of the human mind working according to the laws of nature, and that religion is something that lies outside and may embrace science. Well, on the other hand, you know, if there were suddenly to arise evidence, scientific confirmable evidence, that God exists, then we'd have no choice. Scientists would have no choice but to accept that fact. On the other hand, the fundamentalists don't admit the possibility of evidence, let us say, that would show that evolution exists. Because any evidence you present, they will deny if it conflicts with the Word of God as they think it to be. So that the chances of compromise are only on one side. And therefore, I doubt that it will take place.
If God is dead, everything is permitted. That's what scares them.
Well, on the contrary, that assumes that human beings have no feeling about what is right and wrong. Is the only reason you are virtuous because that's your ticket to heaven? Is the only reason you don't beat your children to death because you don't want to go to hell? It seems to me that it's insulting to human beings to imply that only a system of rewards and punishments can keep you a decent human being. Isn't it conceivable a person wants to be a decent human being because that way he feels better, because that way the world is better? I would like to think, I don't believe that I'm ever going to heaven or hell. I think that when I die, there will be nothingness. That's what I firmly believe. That does not mean that I have the impulse to go out and rob and steal and rape and everything else because I don't fear punishment. For one thing, I fear worldly punishment. And for a second thing, I fear the punishment of my own conscience. I have a conscience. It doesn't depend on religion. And I think it's so with other people too. Besides, even in societies in which religion is very powerful, there's no shortage of crime and sin and misery and terrible things happening despite heaven and hell. I mean, I imagine if you go down death row, a bunch of murderers maybe who are waiting for execution, and ask them if they believe in God. They'll tell you yes.
Is there a morality in science?
Oh, absolutely. There's a morality in science that is further advanced than anywhere else. If you can find a person in science, and it happens, scientists are only human, who has faked his results, who has lied as far as his findings are concerned, who has tried to steal the work of another, who has done something scientists consider unethical, his scientific reputation is ruined, his scientific life is over, there is no forgiveness.
Because the morality is?
The morality is you report the truth, and you do your best to disprove your own findings, and you do not utilize someone else's findings and report them as your own. In any other branch of human endeavor, in politics, in economics, in law, in almost anything, people can commit crimes and still be heroes somehow. To my way of thinking, for instance, Colonel North has done terrible things, yet he's a hero and a patriot to some people. And this goes in almost every field. Only science is accepted. You make a misstep in science and you're through, really through.
You love the field, don't you? You love science.
Oh, I'm very fond of it. I think that it's amazing how many saints there have been among scientists. I'll give you an example. In 1900, De Vries studied mutations. He found a patch of evening primrose of different types, and he studied how they inherited their characteristics. And he worked out the laws of genetics. Two other guys worked out the laws of genetics at the same time. A guy called Charles Carens, who was a German, De Vries was a Dutchman, and Erich von Schermach, who was an Austrian. All three worked out the laws of genetics in 1900. All three looked through the literature, having done so, just to see what had been done before. All three discovered that in 1867, Gregor Mendel had worked out the laws of genetics, and people hadn't paid any attention then. All three reported their findings as confirmation of what Mendel had found. Not one of the three attempted to say that it was original with him once he discovered Mendel. And that's the sort of thing you just don't find outside of science.
Reporting to the truth.
And you know what it meant? It meant that two of them, Carens and Schermach, lived in obscurity. And De Vries is known because he also was the first to work out the theory of mutations. But as far as discovering genetics is concerned, Mendel gets all the credit. And they knew at the time that this would happen, but they did it.
It is the truth that excites you. So what is the value of science fiction? For which you are justifiably universally known.
Okay, let's look at literature as a whole. Fiction. Just any kind of fiction. I think that serious fiction, fiction where the writer feels he's accomplishing something besides simply amusing people, but there's nothing wrong with simply amusing people. But if he thinks that he's doing something besides simply amusing people, what he's doing is holding up a mirror to the human species, making it possible for you to understand people better because you've read the novel or the story, maybe making it possible for you to understand yourself better. This is an important thing. Now, science fiction uses a different method for doing this. It works up an artificial society, one which doesn't exist, one which may possibly exist in the future, but not necessarily. And it portrays events against the background of this society. Well, it's amusing, it's interesting, but in the hope that this will give a new way of looking at people, at looking at yourself, that you will see yourself seen against this strange society in ways you couldn't possibly see yourself seen against the present society. I don't claim that I succeed at this. It seems to me that to do this properly takes a great man, you know, takes a guy on the level of, well, at least half of Shakespeare. And I don't come up there, but I try. And who knows, maybe once in a while I succeed a little bit, but I try. And that's why I write science fiction, because it's a way of writing fiction in a different style and enables me to make points I can't make otherwise.
Someone said that one great advantage of science fiction is to introduce the reader to the idea of changes that may well be inevitable, but which are not conceivable to the reader.
Well, I've said that myself on different times. The fact is that society is always changing, but the rate of change has been accelerating all through history for a variety of reasons. One thing, change is cumulative. The very changes you make it easier to make further changes. It was only with the coming of the Industrial Revolution that the rate of change became fast enough to be visible in a single lifetime, so that people were suddenly aware that not only were things changing, but they would continue to change after they died. And that was when science fiction came into being, as opposed to fantasy and adventure tales. Because people knew that they would die before they could see the changes that would happen in the next century, so it would be nice to imagine what they might be. And other people decided to make money that way. Well, as time goes on and the rate of change still continues to accelerate, it becomes more and more important to adjust what you do today with the fact of change in the future. It's ridiculous to make your plans now on the assumption that things will continue as they are now. You have to assume that if something you're doing is going to reach fruition in 10 years, that in those 10 years, changes may take place, and perhaps what you're doing will have no meaning then. So that nowadays, futurism has become an important part of thinking in business, in economics, in politics, in military affairs. At any rate, science fiction is important because it fights the natural notion that people would have that somehow there's something about things the way they are right now which are permanent.
Use your imagination, which you do so often, in this way. If the next president asked you to and said, Dr. Asimov, make sure I say the one thing you think I must convince the American people that they should pay attention to, what would it be?
Well, it would be this, that all the problems that we face now that are really important, that are life and death, are global problems, that they affect all of us alike. The ozone layer, if it disappears, disappears for all of us. Pollution in the ocean, in the atmosphere, in the groundwater is for the way we can ameliorate, prevent them from destroying us is, again, a global solution. We can't expect that anything the United States alone does is going to affect the situation the world over. There's got to be cooperation among the nations of the world. International cooperation is absolutely essential. And if we can achieve that in the face of a danger deadlier than has ever faced humanity before, why, one of the advantages we'll have is that automatically we will probably start spending less money on war and preparations. Will in turn be a beneficial cycle because we'll have more money for solving these problems we must solve.
What about, though, the one subject you've written so much about, the population explosion? You know, of the globe is over 4 billion. You've said that if
it's over 5 billion.
Over 5 billion, yes. You've said if it continues at its 2% growth rate a year, it'll be what in another? Well,
actually, it's down to 1.6%, but with a higher population, it's the same amount in actual numbers, 80 million a year. So that, by the year 2000, it's going to be perhaps 6 point. Yes, it's going up very fast.
How many people do you think the Earth is able to sustain?
I don't think it's able to sustain the 5 billion in the long run. So that, I mean, right now, most of the world is living under appalling conditions. And we can't possibly improve the conditions of everyone. The entire world to the average standard of living in the United States, because I don't think we have the resources and the ability to distribute well enough for that. We have condemned the world to a miserable starvation level of existence. And it'll just get worse as the population continues to go up.
But you can't just say to a woman, don't have children.
Well, you know, it's not so much that. It's so many people are saying have children. There is such a pro-natalist attitude in the world. We celebrate Mother's Day so enthusiastically. We say, may all your troubles be little ones. We celebrate additional children. I feel sometimes that if we'd only stop pushing for children, that somehow there would be fewer of them.
Why did you say that the price of survival is the equality of women?
Because if women have full ability to enter into all facets of the human condition, if they can enter business, if they can enter religion, science, government on an equal basis with men, they will be so busy that they won't feel as necessary to have a great many children. As long as you have women under conditions where they don't feel any sense of value, no self-worth, except as mothers, except as baby factories, they'll have a lot of children, because that's the only way they can prove they're worth something. In general, if you look through the world, the lower the status of women, the higher the birth rate. And the higher the birth rate, the lower the status of women. So that if you could somehow raise the status of women, I am certain the birth rate will fall drastically through the choice of the women themselves.
What do you see happening to the idea of dignity, to the human species, if this population growth continues at its present rate?
It's going to destroy it all. I use the what I call my bathroom metaphor. If two people live in an apartment and there are two bathrooms, then both have what I might call freedom of the bathroom. Go to the bathroom anytime you want to and stay as long as you want to for whatever you need. And this, to my way, is ideal. And everyone believes in the freedom of the bathroom. It should be right there in the Constitution. But if you have 20 people in an apartment and two bathrooms, no matter how much every person believes in freedom of the bathroom, there is no such thing. You have to set up times for each person. You have to bang at the door, aren't you through yet, and so on. And in the same way, democracy cannot survive overpopulation. Human dignity cannot survive it. Convenience and decency cannot survive it. As you put more and more people onto the world, the value of life not only declines, but it disappears. It doesn't matter if someone dies.
Of course, so many people say, well, the United States is bringing its population under control, that we're going to have a stable population. We're not even reproducing ourselves, and what the rest of the world does, we can't control.
The population in the United States is still going up. The only time it went up really slowly was during the Great Depression, when there were no laws sort of lowering the birth rate. There was just an economic depression which made people think twice before they had children. But the United States is doing something else, which is absolutely refusing to help other nations control population. So that our feeling is somehow that it's enough for us to somehow make sure that the United States is in good shape, and what other nations do is their business. It's not their business, it's our business too.
In other words, we can't exist as a stable economy and a stable society if around us is turmoil, chaos?
Absolutely not. Right now, in many nations, they're just destroying the rainforests because they need the firewood, they need the space for farms.
Why should I care about that?
Because without the rainforests, we're going to have deserts instead. The food supply will dwindle. As a matter of fact, there's even the possibility that we're going to lose all kinds of valuable substances we know nothing about. Those rainforests have an incredible number of species of plants and animals that we know very little about. Some of them may produce chemicals of great importance pharmacologically and medically. Some of the plants might, if properly cultivated, be new food sources. And in addition to that, nothing produces the oxygen of the atmosphere with the same intensity that a forest does. Anything that substitutes for it will be producing less oxygen. We're going to be destroying our atmosphere, too.
You're how old now?
68.
You've lived through a lot of this century. Have you ever seen human beings think with the perspective you're calling on them to think now?
Well, it's perhaps not important that every human being thinks so. How about the leaders thinking so? How about the opinion makers thinking so? Ordinary people might follow them if we didn't have leaders who were thinking in exactly the opposite way. If we didn't have people who were shouting hatred and suspicion of foreigners. If we didn't have people who were shouting that it's more important to be unfriendly than to be friendly. If we didn't have people shouting somehow that the people inside the country who don't look exactly the way the rest of us look, or something's wrong with them. Again, it's almost...
In this day and age, a woman is seldom stolen against her will. Now, you're better forgetting about any woman who would...
Union in New York City, this has been a conversation with Isaac Asimov. I'm Bill Moyers.
SCTV is on the air. Well, not yet. It's really coming up next on Channel 5.
By a grant from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. For a transcript of this program, send $3 to A World of Ideas, Journal Graphics, 267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007. Video cassette information is also available at this address.
I'm Bill Moyers. As a new generation of women enters the workforce, will they be able to change the business world, or will the business world change them? Join me with Catherine Bateson next time on A World of Ideas.
Our closest neighbors, Mars and Venus, are made of the same elements in much the same proportions as our own planet. Yet only the Earth supports the complex phenomenon we call life. NOVA explores a daring and controversial scientific idea suggesting that the atmosphere and climate of Earth is the work of life itself, actively shaping and regulating its own environment. Gaia, Goddess of the Earth, next time on NOVA.
Tuesday at 8 on Channel 5.
Christopher is 7 years old and a gifted inventor. Joy was born 3 months prematurely. Will she face developmental risks later in life? Genetics, environment, both combine to shape the mind of the child. But when does an infant begin to understand the world? And when does a child develop a sense of self? Explore the influences that made each of us who we are. Discover the mind.
Wednesday evening at 8 on WUFT Channel 5.
I'm Kate Mendy. This is my partner, George.
Frankly, MathNet. I'm glad it's right here in the station every day.
Because we're part of Square One TV. It's a program that makes mathematics real. Makes mathematics real. George.
What, Kate?
Tell them about Square One TV.
Why, they've seen it. It's on every day, and it's just one of the many terrific shows on this station. Watch Square One TV. It's a program that makes mathematics a real adventure.
Weekday afternoons at 5 on Channel 5.
Hi, this is David Heil. On the next Newton's Apple, special effects. Filmmakers breathe life into animated creatures.
Move the head a little bit to the right.
We get caught up in the hazards of cholesterol and visit with nature's cleanup crew. Join us on the next Newton's Apple.
Thursday night at 6:30 on Channel 5. Pick your numbers and watch the Florida Lottery's Cash 3 game tomorrow night at 7:57. We've got your number on your official Florida Lottery station, WUFT-TV, Gainesville, Florida.
Voice of the Stars presents Bob Hope.
Pet peeves, you want to know what bugs me? I'll tell you what bugs me. What bugs me are these people that put out these books, you know, that expose people, you know, like that Joan Crawford thing, what she did to her kids, you know. And that Errol Flynn thing, too, that was rough, boy, I'll tell you, I don't know. Boy, he's not around here to stick up for himself. I hate to think what they're going to write about me when I'm gone. It's going to be one mean book, boy. A lot of pictures, I hope. You know, I've always believed that you shouldn't be too tough on your audience.
Major and continuing stories of the day. One noted anthropologist says it's now an overused cliche to speak of the woman forced to make hard choices between work and home, forced to choose between new and traditional roles. Faced with such conflicts, this anthropologist says, many women survive by ingenious and original ways of combining and harmonizing aspects of their lives. While their roles may continue to differ, the underlying themes of their lives remain the same. Because of this, the idea of home as a place to give and receive nurture might become a new metaphor for the workplace. The anthropologist who is saying these things is my guest in this broadcast. Join me with Catherine Bateson.